Welcome to DIY DEI. We've been having a lot of conversations about authenticity, imposter syndrome, and mentorship. And I think today's guest is a great example of bringing all of those topics into one. I think he has a great story to tell about the significance of mentorship, leading authentically as a Black man, and how he's able to balance work and life. I have with me in the studio today Fred Long, the Vice President of Development at UCAN. Thank you so much for coming to the show, Fred.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Like I said, I thought your story was a great example of really all of the things we've been talking about. Mm-hmm. But why don't you give us a little example of how mentorship has impacted your life, your story growing up, what led you to UCAN?
Well, yeah, I've always had a lot of people in support of me. Growing up on the south side of Chicago, coming from a big family in Roseland, a lot of the support that I got was from folks who had challenges, and I had to learn that and not see that as a deficit, as actually an opportunity.
Right.
And that's this whole terminology about disadvantage, DIS, disadvantage. I actually started using it and turning it around like, no, this is the advantage.
Oh, wow.
And so I use, our lexicon in the hood, like this, like we talk, right? Like,
right.
Yeah, this, that. So this is my advantage when you have these hurdles to overcome and experiencing trauma. If you can chronicle it, it actually can be to your advantage.
Wow.
In a non-conventional way.
I love that. So you are no stranger to UCAN.
Yes.
You started out as a program participant.
Yes.
And you've worked your way up with the mentorship of some key people to be vice president. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I came to UCAN as a participant. Growing up in the foster care, mentioning my story and being disadvantaged and impoverished on the south side of Chicago. And I got introduced to this organization, this institution that was here to help young people who suffer trauma. And I remember coming, I never wanted to be part of DCFS. Right. It was this stigma that came along with it. You got ostracized in school and social networks, all of that stuff. And they really helped me understand and chronicle my story and my experience and to let me know. Because I didn't think it was no other, older adolescent males in the system that was having the same experience that I had. And so once I came to UCAN, I was like, oh, damn, there's more people like me. And I really started to embrace it. And I just started to participate in everything they had to offer, whether it was workshops, mentoring programs, workforce programs, all of that. I was probably at the office way more than I probably should have been.
I saw you a lot.
Yeah. And that's how I learned just more about institutions, organizations, and being in the workforce. And at the age of 21, here legally in the state of Illinois, you exit care. So youth who are in state custody, you exit care and you're out on your own.
Right.
And I remember coming back up to the organization on my 21st birthday and was just like, so does that mean I can't come back up here no more? I'm like, what does that mean? And so I just started hanging out at the office still, even though I wasn't technically a participant anymore. And that's how I started my career. I got hired as an intern. It was a one-year internship to give alum of the program an opportunity to be in the workforce. And that's how my journey started. And that was 20 years ago.
Wow, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Still there. So when I was thinking about inviting you and just researching your story, I was like, I really don't remember Fred talking about school, college. And then I saw that you went to Chicago State.
Yes, CSU. It's one of the best universities in the world.
So your experience in the program really led you to going to college.
Yeah, it was actually a requirement. And I started off, when I graduated high school, I went to work. I didn't have no anticipation of going to college at all. As I mentioned, I was already in DCFS, living in foster care, relative foster care with my grandmother. And, we just had this mind state of you have to work your way out right? And so I just went to work. And I remember getting a call from one of my caseworkers at the time saying, hey, you're 19, you're eligible, you graduated high school, you're eligible for this program called independent living. One of the requirements, though, is you have to be working part-time and or full-time and, enrolled in college part-time and or full-time. So you have to do one or the other.
Right.
And that's how I got introduced to just going to college, because I wasn't planning on going. It wasn't part of my trajectory. And I started out at East West University initially, a small university here downtown Chicago, right by Columbia College. And I didn't really do well in my first couple of years. And I was still in the program at UCAN. And then when I exited, I was working. So I was like, look, do I want to stay in college? And I had my own apartment, which they helped me get initially. And then I was able to take over the lease. And I said I can't do both at the time. I can't go to college full-time and work full-time and keep my apartment. So I decided to drop out. And I had never went back to college until probably almost 10 years later.
Wow.
And that's when I decided to go to Chicago State to complete my undergrad. And I felt really strong about it because I grew up probably less than a mile from Chicago State, living in Roseland. And I always felt connected to the south side of Chicago. That's why to this day I feel Chicago State is my Harvard.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So what prompted you to go back to school?
I think in the workplace, I couldn't progress professionally and move up the ladder and the chains without certain academic accomplishments. Like there were certain roles that required post-secondary education degrees.
Right.
And I was like, man, I come from this non-conventional way. I don't think I need a degree to do what I'm doing. I've already been working here 10 years.
Right.
I think my work ethic, my experience, and my talent was more than enough for a role. It wasn't like it was a case manager role where it's required for you to have a LCSW or a master's degree in social work, because I wasn't a social worker. I was really in operations and programs.
Okay.
And I was like, well, we can create a pathway minus this degree. And I was like, and it wasn't the case.
Yeah. I often tell my son, because he's like, I don't know what to major in. I don't know what to do. I don't want to go back to school. And I'm like, I know you want to be successful doing something. And I am a firm believer of a degree is just that general admission ticket into the room. It won't grant you a seat at the table, but at least you are in the room.
Yeah.
And you can pave your own way to get to that table or create your own table. So how did mentorship really impact your path?
Well, as I mentioned, earlier, I had a lot of people that supported me, and a lot of folks who didn't look like me supported me as well. Meaning they weren't black men or African American in that sense. And it took me a while to figure out, for one, because I never, to be totally transparent, I even never liked the word mentor because it came with a connotation like, initially with me just being uneducated about it, was just like, all right, like when folks say they're your mentor without you giving and validating that, I never liked that. It's like you're trying to take control of. I didn't place that upon you. I always think mentorship starts from the mentee has to allow the mentorship to happen as opposed to someone wanting to mentor someone. That was my perspective. I ain't saying it's right or wrong, but that was my perspective. And
I think there's some truth to that.
And I had a lot of folks that didn't look like me that seen the talent that I had and actually invested in me. And where I came from initially, and growing up, it wasn't a lot of, I wouldn't call a lot of mentors. I had a lot of people that supported me. But the folks who supported me unconditionally, regardless, was actually a lot of people who didn't look like me. And I had to reconcile it. Like, what does that mean?
Right.
I don't know how to react to that, right? Like, is this authentic? And why are you supporting me, right? Especially for, like, white women and men. And it took me a while to adjust to that. So,
wow, yeah.
But I've had some really strong African American women in my life in the workplace that did wrap their arms around me, and men, and really helped me progress just through life, not just in the workplace.
Yeah. So you talk a lot about where you come from.
Yeah.
How does that play a role, your background, you being a black man from Roseland? How does that play into you being an authentic leader, just being true to yourself, but being a black male leader?
Yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic and an experience that sometimes it's almost this unspoken truth and about the experience that black men have in workplaces, especially when you move into a leadership role or an executive leadership role. I remember when I first started at UCAN, I used to have my pants sagging. I had both of my ears pierced. I was engaging in certain activities. And I had somebody come to me and challenge me like, hey, man, pull your pants up. And this was a white person. Like, man, pull your pants up. Take them earrings out. And I was like, man, who you talking to? So that authentic Roseland part of me was playing out early. Like I took a lot of stuff personal in terms of people's commentary about my culture in the workplace.
Yeah.
And I learned after time that they were definitely on point by telling me that, but culturally I didn't understand it because I hadn't been trained how to navigate that stuff.
Yeah.
And this DEI, equity in the workplace, cultural relevance wasn't even. This is the early, mid-2000s.
Yeah.
It wasn't really talked about or discussed the way that it is today in modern times. So, I kind of struggled with that initially. And I internalized a lot of critique or commentary about myself in the workplace. I took that, personal.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I learned, that wasn't personal. This is a workplace. You ain't back in Roseland, bruh.
Right.
You know what I mean? And certain environments require certain things.
Yeah.
And, so it was a challenge for me initially. And then the other challenge was, even like sometimes the way I talk, people were like, man, and we get all of these kind of cultural dings, when you go back to your neighborhood, your friends, man, why you talk like that? Why you dress like that, man? And why you around all these white people? Hey, man. And so I think the more struggle for me was navigating that as opposed to the workplace.
Yeah.
And navigating my people and my culture and my family and the customs that we were used to, good, bad, or indifferent, and how they became institutionalized in us. And, I think just navigating that really helped me in the workplace. Became almost easy for me. Yeah. So. Yeah,
I grew up, my mom was in management, my grandmother was in management, so I was always taught you act a certain way, you talk a certain way in the workplace. So I was able to navigate that, but I struggled just being able to be myself. I was never comfortable. I was always playing a role. And it wasn't until recently I was able to reconcile the two, being able to bring pieces of my authentic self to work and be a leader while also, being authentic to myself.
Yeah. And for me, I've always been just that, and even still to this day. I actually, I think that was one of the things that really drove me to UCAN, and also has kept me there now over 20 years, is because that environment welcomed a lot of that. And I know I talked earlier about, folks would say do this and do that, but I still felt I could communicate the way I wanted to. I can use certain terminology. And we actually instituted in how you work with young people based on our cultural relevance. Meeting
them where they are. That's what I loved about UCAN. there was never a stigma placed on the youth. It was all about how do we bring them to a place where they can be successful on whatever path they choose.
Yeah.
And I love that about the organization.
Yeah, because, like I said, I had this real hip-hop mentality and culture, and like I said, the terminology, the slang, when appropriate, it was still allowed, and we created programming around it.
Yeah.
And especially being a former participant and an alumni, I know what it feels like to be a client and to have adults in the room who don't get me culturally, and the disconnect that creates. It'll actually impact, how I move throughout the program based on the adults. And if you don't understand me, don't just say it's because you don't understand this. I have to adjust to you. You have to adjust to me. I should be the number one priority as a participant.
Right.
So I walk with that all the time as an adult, working with young people and working with adults who work with young people to have that mentality. And I use this analogy. If we were working in a city in Mexico, right, as African Americans, right, wouldn't you think it would be culturally relevant for you to understand the Latin and Mexican culture and historical relevance before you even try to work with them?
Absolutely.
And that was really never instituted in these child welfare organizations for folks to be almost mandated to take cultural sensitivity training or to learn about the implications of trauma, specifically with African American men, women, boys, and girls. And so that's something that we were able and had that luxury to institute within UCAN and train other organizations on how to approach it from that perspective as well.
Yeah, and when you think about community engagement, when you're deploying these various programs and initiatives, it's beneficial to get the community's buy-in and to let the community voice their opinions, their concerns, and recommendations.
Yeah.
And that's another thing I love about UCAN is they allow the youth to have a voice in the programming and how it's created and how it's scaled up. So
yeah, it's one of those things that are like we know it, but to execute it, it's two different things. Like a lot of folks are knowing or aware of a lot of things, but the execution of it and the rollout of it is not as easy as one may think.
Never is. Okay. Talked about mentorship.
Yeah.
Talked about coaching. We talked about a little bit of your story. What I really want to talk about is when you leave the office and you go home, you have two beautiful children, a beautiful wife. How were you balancing both? Because I know when we were scheduling this, you were like, what time? Because the kids got games and activities.
Yeah. So
how do you balance that work life?
Well, for one, I'm real intentional, and a lot of people know that about me. I met my wife in college in the year 2000, and we were just dating. And I remember what it felt like growing up in Roseland, and my mother and father was never married. So marriage and that family unit had been disrupted for many African-American families where I come from. So I knew I was going to be intentional when I selected a partner, and that was going to be my number one priority forever.
Wow.
I knew it. I mean, not saying that I knew that Tina, my wife, would be
right, but you knew
at the time. But I knew I wanted to build a family, and that was, whether I was working, I would do whatever, even if I had to go back to the streets. I didn't care, and so that was my number one, and still is to this day. So, and I remember having my friends, family, and even at work, folks was like, "Damn, man, why you always bringing up your family?" I'm like, "Why not? Why aren't you?"
Right.
This is actually what led us into the system because we don't have these structures. So the way that I balance it is I work my you-know-what off so I can have the privilege to say I'm leaving at this time regardless. And so I actually put that much more into a work day. So when folks are working 9 to 5, I probably can do and accomplish what people would do in 8 hours from 10 to 2.
Right. Yeah.
You understand?
Yeah. Sometimes we don't understand that.
Yeah.
It's
But
about
I'ma still work,
efficiency.
and I'ma still work 9 to 5 too, or 9 to 12, or whatever the case is. And so my commitment to the institution over the years has allowed me this
Right.
grace to be a family man, and folks see me that way as an African American male who's been married now 14 years, 2 kids, and I know the importance of seeing that. Seeing is believing, and so it actually plays into my professional life.
Wow.
If you really look at it from that perspective. And folks in the workplace will see that and be like, damn, why dude always... My friends used to be always, like, when I used to tell the guys, they like, man, we going out tonight. I'm like, well, yeah, not me. I'm going to be at the house, you know.
I have a reason to go home.
Yeah, so I'm always like that. And I get criticized today about it. I don't care, though. I really don't. I never care about that anymore at all.
My partner's the same way. He's like, I have a reason to go home. I don't know about y'all. I don't need to be out in these streets.
Yeah.
I have a reason to go home.
Yeah, and so that's how I really create balance and wanting to be in my kids' life and be present. I'm not the best at that. I'm there. We live in our home. My kids are beautiful, and I actually think I need to spend more time with them.
Right.
You know, and so it's just like the give and take is, all right, I'm going to keep working my butt off, and it's hopefully would allow me to be more available and accessible to my kids. Because I used to work, and I don't know if you remember this when you were at UCAN, I've gained all this PTO because I never would take a day off, ever. So throughout the years, I was just like...
Just keep letting it roll over.
And then and then Tina and I met, and so I'm like, and then we got married, and then we had kids, and years later, and she works for Chicago Public Schools, special education teacher assistant, and bless her heart. So when CPS, they are off during these breaks, so the holiday break like we just had, and this is why I listen to Tina, and you hear me say her name more than a few times, is she's like, look, we gonna be off. You got all this dang on time. You gonna be off too with us. And you know what I say? Like the old Eddie Murphy. Okay. Okay. So
that's a beautiful thing.
So, and I just started really doing that. As long as we've been married, I really just started doing that like right before the pandemic. We've never had taken family vacations and all of that. So, and we do that every year intentionally now. So
in our last couple minutes, what advice would you give a young man who's trying to find his path?
One, just don't give up on yourself when things get hard and tough, because that's coming. It's no way to avoid it. And that may look and feel different than my own personal journey, but that's the key ingredient that's going to help propel you and push you and keep you going, moving forward. It's going to be the fuel that drive you. If you that's why I say the disadvantage is that's the advantage.
I love that.
That's my first thing I would tell someone, especially a young man who look like me and trying to find their way, whether it's in the workplace, in school, in the community, and also to just learn to be uncomfortable. Uncomfortability, and that's the growing pain. It's just like when you're working out, and if you're not aching, in pain, like when you're working out, you're not really gaining much, right? So it's the same thing with me. I call it the life game. And that's my personal brand, is the life game. This is the game of life.
Yeah.
Everybody, my shoe game nice, man. My spit game nice, man. What's your life like, though?
Right.
You understand?
Oh.
So I think accept those challenges and find a way to not internalize the challenges and isolate yourself when those things happen. And if you can find someone, anybody, I don't care who it is. I used to always talk to the guys outside the liquor store when I was about 12, 13, 14. Most people walk past them, they call them junkies, winos, all of that. Those are some of the most historically relevant, most business savvy, strongest people I ever met in my life. That's where a lot of the African American history and stories are, and we miss out on that because they have been impacted and they couldn't pass a lot of that down. But that's where a lot of our fathers and a lot of boys who are like me who didn't have it, that's where all of that institutional knowledge and love lies. So when I see people in those situations, I'm actually engaging.
Okay.
So I would, just encourage people to find something that you're not used to and accustomed to.
Discomfort. Well, thank you so much, Fred. And the word of the month or the year is going to be disadvantage.
Yes.
Turn this opportunity into an advantage. I am your host, Tawanna Streater. I'll see you next time on DIY DEI.